back to yet another episode of Ball with Y'all. Today is April 20th. We are flying through the month of April. We are almost in May, which is pretty incredible to me. So excited that you chose to join us here today, whether that's via Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Radio Public Breaker, or on YouTube at BWY Productions. So glad to have you here today. Of course, we do have a full show as always. One quick programming note before I get into today's show. First off, you might notice that I sound like a goose. Well, I'm a little under the weather, right? I had a little under the weather over the last few days. We're starting to get out of it, so I should be okay here shortly. But if I sound a little bizarre, a little weird, a little unusual, that would be why. The second thing, we are actually moving studios this weekend. So I'm going to take a week off next week so that I can establish our studio, make sure we're all set up, and then we'll be back on May 4th. So this is the last episode for the month of April, and then we'll be back in the month of May for just a few more episodes in Season 2, and then we'll be taking a little bit of a sabbatical, if you will, taking a break for the summer and restarting in, August or September, somewhere in that ballpark. We haven't really figured that side of things out, but like I said, we'll be back May 4th for the final few episodes of Season 2, so hopefully you will enjoy today's episode and you'll choose to join us once again in early May. Now, what did we see all this weekend? There were a number of things happening, of course, in the football world, with a number of spring games going on, with a number of USFL football games going on. The first time we got to see professional, quote-unquote, professional football since the second week of February, so that was pretty fun to see. And also, we had some professional basketball going on with the NBA playoffs happening. I'm not really going to talk so much about the NBA playoffs, but that happened. And then, of course, we were coming off of Easter weekend. Hopefully you had a great Easter. I had a pretty strong Easter myself, and of course I got to wrap it up by watching Kyle Busch win this past Sunday at Bristol on the dirt. So a wild weekend, to say the least, and we've got a few more things happening over the next few days as well. So hope you are ready for yet another full episode as we get into all of that. So with that being said, let's get into story number 1. Like I mentioned, Kyle Busch did the unthinkable on Sunday night. He was down 4 seconds from the leader with 1 lap to go on Sunday and found a way to back in to that win on Sunday. And, you know, it was funny because he collected his first win of the year when Chase Briscoe collected Tyler Reddick on that last lap. And there were a number of interesting storylines that came out of this. Of course, at the end, you had, throughout that race, Chase Briscoe was strong throughout the race. Of course, he is a notable dirt racer. And he cuts down a tire, I believe, pretty early on in the race after leading a number of laps, goes to the back, fights his way back to the front, and then it looks like he might have a chance, not really sure where he's going to land. He ends up getting right next to Tyler Reddick at the end and just shoves it into that final turn, ends up spinning around Tyler Reddick, takes himself out, he starts hemorrhaging spots, and then Kyle Busch just sneaks through for that win. And, the first thing that really stood out about this race, of course, there are always rain concerns, always, when you're outdoors, and every single one of these tracks is outdoors, but particularly there are rain concerns when it comes to being on a dirt track. So when you look at the radar and you see, okay, there's a 60% chance of rain on Sunday night at 9 o'clock, which is 2 hours after the race starts, you have cause for pause, a reasonable cause for pause. So then, when you get to the end of stage 2 of the race on Sunday, and it goes Chase Briscoe, and I forget who all else was up there, but a few guys, Chase Elliott, I believe, was 4th or something like that. And then the rain starts to come, and they red flag it, and they put the tarps over the cars. I had every indication to believe the race was over, right? And this is where some of the controversy came about. I don't know if you were familiar with this, but there was a controversy talking about who would have been the winner had the race gone final after stage 2. There was a situation where, because the pits were non-competitive, that if you chose to pit, great. If you chose not to pit, great. The cars that chose not to pit would go in front of the cars that pitted. And but the way that the non-competitive stops worked is they would not score them until they started in the next stage. So what ended up happening in this case was that Chase Briscoe chose to pit, and of course Kyle Busch chose not to pit, as did a series of drivers, Bubba Wallace and some other folks. So Chase Briscoe would not end up leading coming off of stage 2 going in stage 3, but he was the leader to end stage 2. So it's funny to hear all the drivers during that rain delay after stage 2, try to argue their case and suggest, oh, well, I should be the leader. Ultimately, it didn't really matter. Chase Briscoe still went out there and did what Chase Briscoe did toward the end. They got through 2 different rain delays, and I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they got restarted 2 different times. And it was pretty quick, honestly. Kudos to NASCAR for cleaning off the track as quickly as they did. I think it was like 20 minutes both times or something like that. Pretty remarkable. As soon as the race stopped, they were able to clean it up pretty quickly. And then, of course, the funny thing was that it felt like this race took forever, right? And we kind of deserved a pretty strong finish, I felt like. And to that extent, we haven't had a good race, I think it's fair to say, in almost a month now. So the fact that we got a pretty incredible finish in the form of Reddick being taken out and Briscoe ending up losing that spot as well and just giving it to Kyle Busch, that was a pretty good finish. And overall, a pretty strong race as well for a track that a lot of us, we really didn't know what to expect on dirt. Last year wasn't all that exciting. Logano won, but did we really expect, or did we really take away a whole lot from that race? Not really. But this was a pretty strong race, a pretty strong product going into Talladega week. Now, we know that I'm not a Kyle Busch fan, right? We've established that. I'm not a big guy, not a big supporter of him, right? But I did think it was hilarious that he won his first race this year off of a situation where he kind of backed it in, where he lucked out, given his comments about Alex Bowman in the past. So I thought that was incredible, and I was all for him winning in what was rather a lucky situation. And I also, like I said, loved that finish. So I was okay that he benefited from it, even though it involved a Joe Gibbs Racing guy winning, and that was a little unfortunate, to say the least. What was also unfortunate was the post-race situation, the post-race discussions, or lack thereof, if you will. Remember, of course, last time we were at Bristol, it was on concrete or asphalt. That involved Chase Elliott and Kevin Harvick, and the pushing and shoving. Harvick was wearing his helmet still, which was incredibly childish, but neither here nor there. And then, of course, during this race, we saw the whole Chase Briscoe and Tyler Reddick situation, and I thought there would be some throwing of hands, some pushing and shoving on pit road afterward. But no, they had a very cordial interaction, and it was very friendly, which was kind of, I was like, oh, well, I would really have liked to seen some excitement on pit road and some passion, but no, just a little bit of passive. And honestly, there was another situation that was a little bizarre. Cody Ware, he started bumping into Chase Elliott at one point, and I don't know who the heck Cody Ware thinks he is, but Chase Elliott's Chase Elliott, and you are Cody Ware, sir. You need to take a step back, right? And so I don't know if there was any sort of interaction on pit road, but I wish Fox would have shown us, had there been interaction between Cody Ware and Chase Elliott, how that would have unfolded in the aftermath of the race. I know there was a lot of thoughts as far as the race being on Easter. A lot of people didn't love that it was on Easter. A lot of people chose to think that racing, or that Easter itself, is more of holy is the wrong word, a sacred day, which obviously it is a holy day, but a sacred day where no NASCAR should be run for whatever reason. I don't know that I have a strong opinion on that. I've seen a lot of numbers that would suggest that viewership was high, so I'd imagine that we're probably going to have Easter racing next year as well. I will say, though, I loved the pre-race Easter service. If you had the chance to watch that, with Max Lucado going on there and speaking, and then they also had Chris Tomlin out there as well. Like I said, I don't know that I really cared for the racing itself on Easter. I was really kind of indifferent, but I did love that element. So if they do go back to having an Easter race next year as well, I hope they keep that Easter service. And I mean, for all I care, bring Max Lucado back. It was pretty incredible to hear him. Been a long time since I got to hear his message. As far as this week, we are going into a big week. It is Talladega week. So who do we like to win this Sunday at Talladega? Of course, last year you saw Brad Keselowski and Bubba Wallace go out there and win. Of course, Bubba Wallace won in a shortened race there. Historically, some of the top performers here have been Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He has 6 top 5s and 17 starts with an average finish of 14th. Brad Keselowski, 6 wins in 26 races, an average finish of 15th, I apologize. And Joey Logano, 3 wins and 9 top 5s in 26 starts, an average finish of 7th for Joey. So there are some guys that know this track pretty well. And also, like we talked about before with Daytona, Talladega is kind of a mixed bag. You don't know what to expect from Talladega. So this one should be a lot of fun, right? And I do think that we'll see a bit of a familiar face in a victory lane this week. In fact, I think it could be a first-time winner this year. Not a first time in their career, but first-time winner this year. I love Austin Dillon this week. He has an average finish of 19th in 17 races. I also like Logano, like I mentioned. He's been pretty strong here as well. And I particularly love Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney, of course, is second in points right now, just 3 points back of Chase Elliott. He's won here twice, and his average finish is 17th in 15 races. So I will take Ryan Blaney of Penske to come out and win this Sunday to break through and regain control of the points lead. On to story number 2. Who watched the USFL this weekend? I hope you got to enjoy some of those games. They were 4 games? 4 games between all 8 teams, and a lot to dissect there. The season opener was remarkable between Birmingham and New Jersey. That was a pretty fun game to watch. I didn't love everything that I saw that night, but I did enjoy most of the things that I saw that night, and I thought it was a pretty strong story to tell for the league and for those teams and for those players, of course. The Birmingham crowd showed up strong on a Saturday night, which was incredible to see. And it might also have been part of why Alabama only had 30,000 fans in attendance for their spring game. You could also blame the weather, but neither here nor there. We've talked about spring games and their relevance before anyway. Now that we have the first 4 games in the books, though, I sat back and tried to break down some of my biggest takeaways now that we are officially through the inaugural week of the USFL. My first takeaway, I wasn't a big fan of the in-game audio, right? I thought it was cool, and I know we've heard it done before with the NFL. They have the players mic'd up, and sometimes they do the post-game audio breaks. I forget what they call it, but it's like you're in the game, you're hearing the players, you're hearing the coaches after the fact, right? But in this situation, I felt it was a little bit overdone. They had players mic'd up. They had coaches mic'd up. And what the issue was is you're hearing them live, and you're also trying to listen to the announcers, right? So there were numerous times where I could barely hear the announcers because of the audio that was coming in from the players or coaches. And then, of course, there was the drive that was in the Birmingham, New Jersey game. I think it was late third, beginning of fourth quarter, somewhere in that neighborhood. And all we heard that entire drive was New Jersey's head coach, Mike Riley, his voice. Silence, radio silence from the announcers. I don't know whose idea that was. I don't know who thought that was a brilliant decision. I don't know why we felt it was appropriate to only listen to the head coach for 12 straight plays in what felt like an eternity, right? But I don't tune into the games so I can listen to the coaches talk. I tune into the games to watch the plays and hear top analysis from guys who don't actually know what's about to be called, right? Now, I'm okay with, having that element. In fact, I thought it was really cool when Birmingham's quarterback went out with an injury and he literally said what it was. They picked it up on the mic, and then after a commercial break, they played it. I thought that was great. That was a perfect element to add. But I don't know that I want that as my main broadcast. I don't know that I want to hear Mike Riley's voice for an entire drive. It kind of reminded me of some of the national championship games we see, some of the college football playoff games we see, where there's numerous broadcasts. I would be all for a second broadcast that just has player and coach audio, right? But the issue that came about this past Saturday and Sunday was, and to that extent Monday as well, because I know one game got postponed to Monday, it kind of felt like you're watching a high school game, right? You could hear the players and coaches more than the fans, and it kind of felt like a high school environment. Whereas if you watch an NFL game or a college football game, the fans play a prominent role in that broadcast. So to the point where you get to a quieter crowd, you're not going to know the difference whether it's a large crowd or a small crowd because you can't really hear them anyway, right? It felt very far from a professional broadcast from an audio standpoint. And if you're trying to go for a professional environment for a professional football league, You have to make it sound a little bit more professional than a high school kind of environment. Another takeaway. The quarterbacks, and to that extent the offensive line, are simply atrocious, right? The offensive line play is horrible. None of the quarterbacks impressed me. I know these guys are not the best of the best. I understand that. If they were, they'd be playing in the NFL, or they would have had terrific careers in college. I get it, right? But it was absolutely atrocious watching some of these guys, their accuracy, how bad some of these dudes can be, right? And I know they haven't had too long to practice. I think it's been 3 or 4 weeks at this point in time. And they'll get better throughout the season. I understand all that. But we live in a world right now where quarterback play runs the day, right? Alabama lives or dies with their quarterback, as did Ole Miss in their playoff game this year, or their playoff game, their bowl game against Baylor. In the NFL, if your quarterback goes down, you're probably not going to do all that well. Look at Seattle Seahawks this year. I know Russell Wilson ultimately came back at some point in time, but he got hurt, and pretty quickly their team went down the garbage hole, right? The Giants are horrible. Well, Daniel Jones is pretty bad, right? A repeated theme throughout overtime, right? The Packers, as soon as you saw that Aaron Rodgers was returning to the Packers this year, you had an assumption that they're probably going to be pretty good this fall. You live and you die by your quarterback. So it's going to be weird to see how some of these teams are going to live and die in spite of their quarterback play. And of course, the offensive lines, they didn't really do a lot of favors for their quarterbacks either. And that's another side of things. If you're not giving your quarterback time or the proper platform to throw from, then he's not going to do that well anyway. So a lot to improve upon there, but I really don't think that the quarterback play is going to get substantially better to the point where a team can rely on their quarterback to win them games. It seems pretty likely that these teams are going to have to win in spite of their quarterback play. And then my last takeaway. I don't know how I missed this in my prep last week when I was kind of previewing the season. But playing all the regular season games in Birmingham is absolutely idiotic. Now, I would love this if I still lived in the Birmingham area. I would be all for it, right? $10 tickets to go to the games. Kids under 15 go to the games for free. Cool. But every single game is being played in Birmingham. Every single regular season game is being played in Birmingham. Then, of course, they're going to take the playoff to like Canton, Ohio or something like that, and for the championship game. But why would you put every single regular season game in Birmingham? In case you didn't know, it's not just Birmingham that plays in Birmingham. Houston, Michigan, New Orleans, Tampa Bay, they're all going to play their home games in Birmingham at, I believe, Legion Field and Protective Stadium, where UAB calls home. Now, why would you do this? I was reading some of the reasoning behind it. They talked about cutting cost and, of course, COVID, because everybody is terrified of COVID. Well, literally, I think in the last 24 hours that all the airplanes finally decided to drop their stupid mask mandates. We know COVID doesn't really exist anymore. The vaccines have come and gone. We've discussed all this before. I'm not going to get too far into it. We can't use COVID as a safe barrier anymore. And what is the point in giving the teams names if they're all going to play in Birmingham? Well, shouldn't they just be Birmingham A, B, C, D, E, and so on? I mean, why call a team the Tampa Bay Bandits if they're not even remotely close to Tampa Bay, nor do they have any connection to the city because they're not playing there, right? How am I, as a fan from, say if I lived in Michigan, how am I going to care about the Michigan team if they're playing all their games in Birmingham, Alabama? How am I going to create any sort of connection to them? How am I going to... I'll put it this way. When I was growing up, I became a Spurs fan, not because I watched them on television. No, because I happened to go to a game, and now I'm a Spurs fan for life, right? The San Antonio Spurs. And the same is true for so many people out there, where unless you have a connection to a team, for whatever reason, you're not going to just fabricate a connection without experiencing that team. So how are you going to actually build that connection? It seems impossible based on the current model. And also, did you see the attendance on Sunday? Now, we talked about how The crowd showed up Saturday night, and it was incredible to see the city of Birmingham and that local area respond and really just take hold of spring football, the return of the USFL. It was incredible. I loved seeing it. But then Sunday, I came home from Easter Sunday service. It was around 12:30, 1 o'clock. I turned on the television, and there's Houston playing against Michigan, I believe. And there were a few shots from the crowd, and I saw that nobody was in the stands, and that's a little bizarre. Maybe they had some COVID restrictions in place. Maybe because it's Easter Sunday at 11 a.m. Central Time. Maybe that's part of it. And then I come to find out that they are playing in UAB Stadium. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense. Of course, you are not going to have a lot of people there because, first off, you're not playing remotely close to these two teams. Second off, it's Easter Sunday at 11 a.m. There's just no shot that you're going to have a lot of people at these games. And from a revenue-generating standpoint, when you're only charging $10 a ticket, how are you going to make money? There's a lot of questions there on that front. And like I said, how do you expect to build momentum in these hometowns? How do you expect these fans in these random areas, Michigan, Houston, Pittsburgh, to actually tune in and pay attention to their teams, even if they've never watched them in person? How do you expect that to happen? And I know this is only like a month and a half project, and then we figure it out later, but I have a lot of concerns based on the location of these games. And if I had known this a week ago, I probably would not have spoken as glowingly about the league as I did. So my takeaway, my bold statement as it relates to the USFL, I don't think that the USFL survives more than one full season. The product, it's fine, right? It's not great, but it's fine. It's good. It's fun to watch, right? They do some pretty incredible things. It's awesome. Some guys, some names that I've heard before, right? Some guys who used to watch the SEC. That's fine. The product itself is fine. But they have no reach. And they have no attraction to these local markets. So the decision to play all the games in Birmingham, like I said, it's absolutely idiotic. It's so dumb. And I think it will bury them rather quickly. I'd love to see them last a long time to buck the trends of spring leagues. But this location issue, I feel like, is going to bite them pretty quickly. And I'll hate to see it, honestly. But who knows? They might prove me wrong, and I hope they do. But like I said, I don't like the long-term outlook of the USFL based on pretty much the location decision that they've made by playing all their games in Birmingham, Alabama. On to story number 3. Last week, ESPN released their initial Football Power Index rankings for 2022. And, there were some familiar faces, some obvious familiar faces at the top with Alabama at number 1, Ohio State number 2, Georgia number 3, Clemson number 4, and Notre Dame at number 5. Those all made sense. I get it. I know why they're there, right? But then that's where some of the rankings stopped making sense. There were a number of teams in the top 10, in the top 25, in the top 50 that were way too high, way too low. I want to focus immediately on the top 15 for now. For example, Pittsburgh, number 9. They were ranked number 9 by ESPN's Football Power Index. This is the same team that just lost their Heisman caliber quarterback. I think he finished third or fourth in the Heisman voting this year to the NFL. You really think that Pittsburgh, without Kenny Pickett, is going to go anywhere in 2022? Absolutely not. I don't know why they're number 3. Number 9. Oklahoma State at number 13. I know Oklahoma State, they're a quality team, right? And they just barely lost the conference championship to Baylor. But they're returning just 53% of their production from 2021. That is bottom 20 in the country. So I don't care how well you performed in 2021. If you're returning that little production from your team from the year prior, no way are you actually a top 15 program going into 2022. Not to say they can't get there, but there's no logical reason for them to be that high as far as I am concerned. Same thing also with Michigan and Oklahoma. Michigan, they're returning only 65% of their production. Same thing with Oklahoma, 64%. And yet somehow they are slotted at 7th and 8th respectively. And I kind of sit back and say, okay, what happened with Michigan and Oklahoma? Oh yeah, I forgot. Michigan got slapped by Georgia. And Oklahoma, keep in mind, they're bringing in a new coach. There's still some questions as far as their quarterback position. A lot of things that just don't make a lot of sense right now, and I can't justify having them that high in my football power index if I was to create one myself. But there was one team in the top 10 that stood out like a really bad scent. Like you're just going around, walking around a room, and then you smell something that just stinks. And I was like, what is that smell? And I said, oh, that's the number 10 Auburn Tigers. That's what smells. Apparently Auburn is number 10 in the football power index. What? I don't understand. I don't get it. We've talked about the issues with Brian Harsin, right? We know that he almost got fired this offseason. We've talked about all the guys that transferred away from Auburn, right? Talked about almost losing Tank Bigsby. We don't know what their quarterback position looks like. Is it going to be TJ Finley? Is it going to be Zach Calzada? We don't really know what's going to happen at Auburn. And in fact, according to that same football power index, Auburn has the second lowest odds of any team in the top 23 to even get 6 wins. But somehow they are ranked number 10 in the initial FPI rankings. I can't justify it. I tried really hard. Because when you smell something that bad, you want to understand why it exists. But I couldn't do it. And again, I hope Auburn proves me wrong, but I don't see it right now. Now, who was ranked too low in this initial release of the football power index? Honestly, Mississippi State. Here's why. They're returning the 17th most production from last year at around 78% or so. Of course, we know about Will Rogers, the quarterback, and so on. 24th for them. They come in 24th. That's respectable, right? But I feel like they probably deserve better, at least in the initial rankings. Now, will they actually perform to the point where they deserve to be a top 25 team? We'll see. But I think they probably deserve to be higher than 24th right now, especially if Auburn's 10th, right? South Carolina. FPI has them listed at 45th with an expected win total of 6 wins. But much like Mississippi State, South Carolina, they are returning 73% of their production, which is more than all but 2 SEC teams just behind the aforementioned Mississippi State Bulldogs and the Tennessee Volunteers. I think they'll get more than 6 wins this year. And in fact, I would go as far to say that they'll be ranked at some point this year. So I think 45th is far too low for the South Carolina Gamecocks. And lastly, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, you might be thinking, what? You just said that Ohio State's number 2. Yeah, I know. I get their second, right? And I know that they're behind my team at number 1. But they're returning the most production of any team in the top 20 at 76%. And approximately 11 more percent than the team that I just mentioned. Alabama's only returning like 65% of their team from last year, of their production. Look at some of the quarterback play. C.J. Stroud, right? Look at the running back play with Travion Henderson. Look at the wide receiver play with Smith and Jigba. Ohio State's going to be scary next year. I don't understand how they wouldn't be number 1 in this initial rankings. And honestly, I expect them to get to number 1 at some point in time in the rankings throughout the year next year in 2022. But it seems as though they'd probably deserve to be number 1 at this point in time. Objectively speaking, I think Ohio State deserves to be number 1 in ESPN's Football Power Index. Of course, it doesn't really matter anyway. This will all shake out on the field. But it is pretty fun to speculate a little less than 140 days, only about 140 days from kickoff here in the month of September. And that will do it for today's show. I hope my voice was not too unbearable for you. I don't know how we did it, but we got to the 30-minute mark, which is pretty incredible as far as I'm concerned. Where do we go today, of course? We talked about Kyle Busch sneaking in that win this past Sunday at Bristol, and how I like Ryan Blaney or maybe Austin Dillon to win this Sunday at Talladega. We talked about the USFL, some highs, some lows, and honestly, I'm not liking their odds to survive here for quite some time, mainly because of the fact they play all their games in one city that has no connection to the other 7 teams. But who knows? I might end up being wrong on that front. And lastly, we talked about the ESPN Football Power Index. Some teams that deserve to be a little higher, some teams that have no business being as high as they are, and so on. But like I said, we'll see how that unfolds this fall. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope if you want to check out more, you'll join us on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Public Breaker, or Instagram at Ball With Y'all Podcast. Like I said, we will not have another episode until May 4th, so be sure to check out all of your platforms, set your reminders and so on, so that you can get back on our episodes as soon as we are back here live in our new studio. So excited to release that new facility as soon as it is up and ready. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I thank you for allowing us the opportunity to talk some ball with you.